Our app's coming along pretty well. Hello and welcome everyone. So today we're gonna finish off the articles and possibly the editor. So the first thing that we're gonna do is obviously open up our editor, but we're gonna create a new page component called articles. And let's open up that React. And first I'm just gonna make a simple boilerplate that says article works with an exclamation mark, because why not? And then we also need to make sure that in our app component, we're gonna add it into, let's put it right here, right before our profile. And I'm gonna make it go to /articles/slug, because we're gonna need the slug param later on. And this is red because we need to make sure that this uses the route component props from each router. So let's import that and make sure that this is a function component that uses those props. Alright, and if we go back to our browser and click on any one of these articles, there's our little article works. And this is what we're going to be mainly working in. So let's transform this from a one-liner to a return so that we could actually check what's inside of our state. And if you remember, it's going to be inside of state.articles.db. And to get the route param from each router, we can destructure slug, but we're also going to have to update the route type here, which takes in a generic type of the, the URL params. And the URL param that we're going to be using is slug, because that's what we called it. And it's going to be a string type. And from there, we can define the article that we're going to be using with that slug. Now the slug could be undefined, so right now I'm just going to do slug and. We're going to have to update this logic a little bit later, just because we need to be a little more strict. But if we do a console log now, we can take a look at what's being returned. Let's also save so it's formatted correctly. And let's click on the article again. And over here, above my head, is the data that's coming back. We have the article and the author and everything. There is one problem though. If we do a refresh, it's going to be undefined, and that's because we need to make sure that we load the article on mount, so whenever the application loads, just in case we don't have it in our store. So once again, we're going to open up our articles state file, and I'm gonna go all the way to the top. So just above load articles, we're gonna make the singular version of that. So const load article, which will be an async action. The type that we're gonna give it for the value is gonna be a string, which is gonna be the slug that we're gonna use. And before and after our request that we're gonna create, we're gonna be setting and unsetting the loading property. And again, we'll be using a try catch block to wrap our request. The request that we're gonna make is get article, and that comes from the state's effects, and then we're going to set that specific article with the key of slug to the article that comes back. And then in our actions, we need to add load article to the export, and then the article component, we can now destructure actions articles, and we'll get load article, and that's where we could use the use effect hook. And I want to call this hook every time the slug changes. And inside of the callback function, we're going to call load article, passing in the slug, if the slug exists, and if we don't already have that article inside of our database. And if we save and check we'll notice that it's being called. So if we do a refresh, the article does come back. And if you look at the overmind store, inside the state, the DB does have that single article, so it'll always be loaded. Now we can complete the markup for this, and that will come from the front-end instructions under article. And I'm going to make two components because we're going to do this main one first for the article itself, and then we'll worry about the comments in a later video. The comments are actually down here. So let's make that subcomponent. It's going to be touch, and I'm going to be calling it article content. Once we have that created, we could replace this article works with that content. I'm going to do one thing, and I'm going to add the class name here of article page, and that's just for the root of the page. And inside of the content, we're just going to worry about the markup first, and then we'll do the corresponding data after that. Wait a minute. So I was reading HTML, and there's a piece of it that repeats itself, and I'm calling it article actions, but it's going to be basically the image avatar with the follow and favorite buttons. And we're going to use it in multiple places, so I'm going to make a sub component right here. It will probably be moved to its own file a little later. Alright, so this is the corresponding markup. This is the article actions. This image is going to be the profile avatar. And then this link here is going to be just the name of the user that wrote the article. And down here is the article content. This is the corresponding page. The comment's going to be in this small section right here. And then the body of the article is going to be here. So now I'm going to actually move article actions to its own file, just so to slim down this file a little bit and it'll be easier to read. So I'm just going to copy this and paste. And we'll come back to this in a little bit, but I get rid of this now. And in article content, let's make sure that we actually import article actions so that we can get rid of that error. I guess we don't need link in here, so I can get rid of that. And now let's figure out what kind of data we want. So I'm going to make an interface for props here. Let's make sure that we assign it so that we know that it's being used here. And we're going to follow the same pattern that we did earlier with one of the other components. I believe it was article preview, because we know that we're going to get the entirety of an article response, but let's just set that to the props. So these are the properties that we want to get out of the article response. Title, favorited, favorites count, body, and then from the author it's going to be the username and following. This H1 is going to be where we add title, and inside of this div is where we're going to add the body. Now all the other properties is what we're going to give to article actions. Oh, we actually want the image too, so yeah, let's grab that too. Now in article actions, let's make the interface of props to include everything that we want so that we can send it in. Alright, I believe that's everything we want. So for the author, the username is going to go right here, which we also need to make sure that we have access to all the props. So let's add the destruction. We also need the created date. Created at. Back to where I was saying. So this is going to be the username. And we can also add the to property to this link, which is going to be /username. And the same one for this link. And then for the source of this image, it's going to be image from our props. The date is where we're going to add the created at. And then follow is going to have username. And then favorite post is going to be favorites counts. So that's everything for the user interface. We're going to need favorited and following in a little bit to actually define these actions. So when we click the button, they do stuff. But before we get there, let's go back to article content and pass in all of the props. So we need created at, favorited, favorites count, username, following, and we'll copy this so I don't have to retype it. Alright, now let's fix these squigglies. String order undefined. So we need to coerce some of these things. So I did some type coercion. For favorited and following, I just wrapped it in a boolean because a boolean of null is false, and that's actually what we want. For username, I'm just passing it as an or of empty string, which may or may not be the best thing in the world to do, but it's good enough for me. And then for image, I just updated the actions to make it accept a string or null. And we're going to do the same strategy that we did with article preview, which is we're going to use the isImage utility method that we created. I'm actually going to copy this and replace that there. And I'll just remove this image down here. Now we also need to import isImage so that we can use it. And that's good enough for our UI, so then we could just look at it, basically. Oh, right. We also need to make sure that article content doesn't render this if there is no article. Not the content, the actual article page itself. Here we need to pass in ... article, and we need to wrap this in a conditional of this. So if the article exists, then we'll load the article, or we'll display the article content. If not, we'll just have a fragment that says article not found. And we can also get rid of this console log. We don't need that anymore. And this is what it looks like so far. It's a little strange. This should be centered. Let's go check our CSS. And so the two updates that we need to do is for article actions, we actually need to wrap it in a div. And this div needs the class name of article actions. Big surprise there. And finally, in article actions, there's a weird thing between these two buttons. We need to add a space in between. That's pretty much it. And then now everything looks correct. Now we need to interact with these buttons. So for that, we're gonna, once again, return this so we have space to interact with our state. So we actually just need actions from useOvermind. And the two things we need is favorite and unfavorite, as well as follow and unfollow. Now both of these actions are dependent on whether or not we're following that user or if we favorited this act or this article. So I made two ternary expressions that we could check that, and then we could call that. And let's scroll down. So this is the follow button. We're just gonna add the on click here, where we could call the follow action, and we have to provide that the username. Luckily, follow user and unfollow user both take the username and nothing else. Similarly, we will call the favorite action in the other button, where we can provide the slug, which we actually need. So we're gonna add that to props. Slug goes here and it's a string, and let's add it here in the destructuring. And let's also update article content to provide slug, which we also need to destructure from here. So let's do that too. And that is pretty much it for our article page.